What's going on, everybody? It's Richard Koberger here, the Blue Collar Nerd. Happy summertime. Let's jump into some release notes. All right, first up under accounting, we've got project forecasting built right into the budget versus actuals table. And this is a note that's only going to be relevant to all of you construction folks out there, so commercial and residential new construction, running project financials with GL-based job costing. So previously, the budget versus actuals table could tell you two things. It could tell you what you budgeted and what you've spent so far. What it could not tell you was where this job was going to land when it's all said and done. So if you wanted to forecast your final cost and your final margin, then you were doing it the old-fashioned way with a separate spreadsheet off to the side somewhere, manually calculating your cost to complete, and then reconciling those numbers against ServiceTitan every time something changed. And there was no real structured way to catch a budget overrun until the money was already spent. But now there's a whole forecasting layer built right inside the BVA table inside of ServiceTitan. So you can flip on a forecasting toggle and then you get to a sandbox view with some new columns. Balance to finish, your forecasted cost to complete, forecasted cost at complete, and an over-under cost column. So for any expense segment, you punch in what you actually think it's going to cost to finish as either a dollar amount or a percentage, and you immediately see the impact on your forecasted cost at complete and in your margin in real time before you commit to anything. Plus, in the old world, if you needed to make a cost adjustment, you had to leave the BVA table and go over to the estimate screen to do it. But now you can just click right on that line item and create the cost adjustment without ever leaving the table. You save it as a named forecast with a note if you want. It keeps running history of every forecast and adjustment you make on the project, and then you can come back later and see how your forecasts are tracking against reality. So instead of all that information living in a spreadsheet next to ServiceTitan, your project managers can finally see where a job is heading financially from inside the platform. All right, next under dispatching, flexible timekeeping is coming to the new daily dispatch board. And I should call out here, there's a couple of prerequisites for this one. So first of all, for this to have any impact on you, you need to be using flexible timekeeping in the first place, and you need to be using the newer version of the daily dispatch board. When I say the new daily dispatch board, I'm talking about the one that looks like this with this little slidable jobs tray at the bottom. If you're not using it yet, I recommend you check it out. You can enable it by going to settings and under dispatching and new and upcoming features. It's one of the toggle switches there. And flexible timekeeping, if you're not sure what that is the newer version of timekeeping where people are clocking in and out to specific timesheet activities. So they would specifically be clocking into lunch as an activity or training as an activity. So previously, the new version of the dispatch board only understood job-based events. So if a technician was dispatched to a job or on a job, the board knew about that. But all of those other more granular activities that you could clock in and out of using flexible timekeeping, like lunch or training or PTO or a parts run, that stuff was not visible on the board. Now, yes, you could make non-job event placeholders for those things, but you weren't able to tie in the timesheet activity code that the technician actually clocked into. Which essentially meant if you were doing it that way, then you were double entering stuff that the timesheet activity already recorded. ServiceTitan already knew about that. But now, the moment that any technician clocks into a flexible timekeeping activity, their status updates on the board in real time with no refresh necessary. It just changes right in front of you. And you get to pick how you want this to appear on your dispatch board. So there are 3 display options in your dispatcher preferences that you get to by hitting that little cog icon under the View Options section. So you've got technician status, which is what the tech is doing right this second, working idle on a meal, and how long they've been in that state for. You've got timesheet activity codes, which ties to the actual timesheet entry, lunch, personal time, drive, and how long they've been on that today. And you've got clocked in hours, which just shows how long the tech has been on the clock for that day, and that clock starts the second they begin their first activity. And no matter what you pick, you can always hover over to get all 3 of those all at once. The new board also has this toggle switch to show or hide technician activity history. That's those thin little lines that show when a technician dispatched, how long they were driving for, when they arrived, how long they've been working for. On the old board, those sort of showed up on top of the job bubbles, but in the new board, they show up on their own little section underneath. Assuming you have those turned on, now your non-job stuff is going to show up on that activity line as well. And they will be color-coded, so training will show up as a different color than meals, for example. And you can click right into it to view the details. You can also start and complete non-job events straight from the dispatch board. Your technicians can manage their own from the field app. PTO events are going to block themselves off on the board automatically, and there's an audit trail on each event. And a detail that I really like is that payroll corrections reconcile with the board automatically. So if somebody goes back and fixes an earlier timesheet entry, the board just quietly updates to match. Okay, next, still under dispatching, and you know what? I think this one just might be y'all worthy. So you can now customize the tabs within your jobs tray. And again, this one only applies to the new version of the dispatch board. The new one is the only one that's going to be receiving updates. So previously, the jobs tray, which is that little area at the bottom of the dispatch board that's separated into tabs, it previously only showed a fixed set of system tabs that everybody shared. So if you wanted to see a really specific slice of jobs, a really specific bucket, like let's say all of your unassigned maintenance visits, that was technically possible, but you had to apply filters by hand over and over every time you came back to the tray. But now each dispatcher can build out their own personal tabs, so their own personal buckets of jobs, using those filters, but they stick. So on the jobs tray itself, at the top right, there's going to be this new customize icon. From there, you can name a tab, set your filters, and save it. And now it becomes a one-click shortcut with a live job count right there on the tab. You can rename tabs, you can drag them into the order you want, and you can also hide away any of the default system tabs that you don't use. You can run up to 20 of your own custom tabs alongside the 13 default system tabs. And they are personalized, not system-wide, so if one particular dispatcher has their setup a certain way that works for them, the next dispatcher can have a totally different setup. The ability to customize that jobs tray area has been a very long-running request, so to everybody who was hoping for that, howdy y'all. Okay, next we've got a rebuilt skills management experience. This one isn't going to be on by default with this release, but you can turn it on under settings, dispatch board, and new and upcoming features. So if you use skills to control which technicians can do which jobs, previously that experience was kind of scattered all over the place. So you created the skill on the skills screen, but then if you wanted to do something crazy, like, actually assign that skill to a technician, you had to take a magic carpet ride all the way over to the technician's profile. And then to actually set the skill requirements for a particular job type, you had to go to each job type record separately. So there was no single place to see whether a skill was actually wired up correctly to both the technician and a job type. And as a result, it was real easy to have skills lying around that you thought were doing something, but were really doing nothing because they were just half set up. But now the rebuilt skill screen gives you 4 tabs all in one place: skills, technicians, job types, and cost codes. Cost codes, by the way, is the tab that you'll only see if you're a construction company. It's not relevant to residential companies. So you can create a skill and assign it to technicians and job types right from the same modal. Every skill shows you a count of how many technicians, job types, and cost codes that it's linked to. So if something's got 0 technicians or 0 job types, you can see that easily at a glance. You can bulk assign a skill to a whole crew at once from the technicians tab. So if you just sent like 12 people to a class to get a certification and you want to associate a skill with that, you can just do that in one shot without going to everybody's individual profile. And when you change a skill that a job type requires, ServiceTitan automatically applies that to the already booked future jobs of that type right away. So it's not just going to be jobs that are booked from that point forward, it'll actually apply to the jobs already on the board. So if a tech, for example, wasn't qualified anymore because let's just say you had a ladder skill to say this technician has a ladder on their van, but something happened to that van and now they're in a temporary van that doesn't have a ladder, so now they're not qualified to do any jobs that require a ladder. Well, if we take away the ladder skill, now that's going to get flagged on any jobs that are already sitting on the board that require a ladder. By the way, there's also a separate skills assignment permission so that you can let a service manager or lead dispatcher manage skill assignments without giving them access to the full employee records. All right, next under financing, you can now run multiple financing rate sheets on a single business unit. So previously, a business unit could only have one active rate sheet per lender. So let's just say, for example, you run HVAC and plumbing under one business unit. Not a typical setup, but just for example. And you've got separate Wells Fargo merchant IDs for each one. Well, previously, only one could be active for that business unit. So your plumbing jobs would be showing HVAC financing terms, and the only way around it was to build out a separate business unit just to hold the other program. But now you can assign up to 3 merchant IDs to a single business unit. And you can name each one, so it can be HVAC program, plumbing program, whatever makes sense. And then you can set up custom rules that point specific business units to specific rate sheets. And then out in the field, the technician just sees the application rate sheets as separate tabs with the primary one first, and they pick the right one for the job. You can set all of this up under Settings, Integrations, Financing, Providers, and Accounts. Now this is currently just for Wells Fargo and Synchrony, and it is also US only at this time. Next, under Forms and Media, we've got another note for the construction folks, specifically for the people in your company doing document management with drawings. So you can now create an RFI or a request for information right on the drawing itself. So previously, you'd be in the annotation view looking at a drawing, you'd spot something that needs a question, an RFI, but to actually create that, you would have to leave the drawing and go over to the separate RFI module. And then the next person who actually reads that RFI has to go find your drawing and hunt for the exact spot that you were talking about that you just kind of described in words. But now you can drop an RFI pin right on the exact spot on the drawing itself. And once you drop that pin, you can either create a new RFI from there or link one that already exists. The pin and the RFI stay connected both directions. So from the drawing, you can open the RFI, and from the RFI, you can jump straight back to the pin spot on the right page of the drawing. There's also a task panel in the annotation view that lists every pinned task on the drawing with search and filter. That way you can easily go right to the one that you need. And if you take a pin off, it just automatically unlinks, but the RFI record itself stays intact. So for anybody managing plan sets, this just keeps the question and the location glued together instead of living in two separate places. All right, next under service agreements. And as always, just for clarity, when I say service agreements, we are talking about commercial service agreements, not residential memberships. So you can now make mid-term changes to an active service agreement without canceling it and starting over. This one is on by default, but the edit permission is off by default. More on that in a second. So previously, once a service agreement was active, most of the fields were locked. So if a customer called mid-term to add a new location or switch from monthly to quarterly billing or change the bill to address, your only move was to cancel the whole agreement and build it from scratch, which blows up all of your historical data, it creates billing risk, it messes with your deferred revenue, just generally creates a ton of mess and admin work for what is ultimately a small change. But now, authorized users can edit the active agreement directly. There's a consolidated edit duration and billing schedule modal where you can change the term and billing cadence all in one spot. You can add or remove covered locations, update contracts, and change the bill to customer all without rebuilding. Every change is logged in the audit trail, and your future invoices and revenue recognition just pick up the new settings automatically. Now again, nobody is going to have this edit permission on by default. So if you want people to be able to do this, an admin needs to go into settings and turn on the edit duration and billing schedule permission for whichever roles should have it. Okay, moving into Pro products under Dispatch Pro. The optimization window went from up to 10 days out to up to 2 years out. So previously, Dispatch Pro only optimized within a short window, 10 days max. So anything that you booked further out, like your maintenance agreement visits or seasonal tune-ups, pre-scheduled commercial contracts, that just sat there unoptimized until it drifted into that 10-day out window. But now there's this new background service that's running on a recurring cadence to spot those future jobs and then run the Dispatch Pro optimization on them. And it's gonna be doing that up to 2 years in advance. So a maintenance visit that's booked 6 months out gets a best matched technician and an efficient route right away. And it's gonna keep re-optimizing as the date gets closer and closer and things change. There's a new setting under Dispatch Pro modes where an admin picks the solving mode, so either light or full, for those extended day runs. So if you pre-book a whole year of recurring maintenance in one pass, Dispatch Pro balances all of it out across your techs instead of leaving it for your dispatchers to sort out by hand. One thing to keep in mind though, as always, it's only gonna be as good as the data you're feeding it, so make sure your technician's skills and zones are current before you lean on it too much. Okay, next under the Pro Products section, we have something called Speed to Lead. So this is something for Max customers and virtual agent customers. It's available in the US and in Canada, and it is not available if you're on the ServiceTitan CRM feature. It also leans on adaptive capacity, so that's a prerequisite to have set up. So here's the problem that this feature is going after. So a new lead comes in from Angie or Facebook or Thumbtack or a web form, and that lead sits in ServiceTitan until a CSR can get to it. And during a busy stretch, or if it's after hours or on the weekend, that delay can be hours or even not until the next day. And we've probably all heard the stat, a lead that sits and waits more than about 5 minutes is way less likely to convert because the homeowner's already called the next company on the list. So what Speed to Lead does is it sends that homeowner a personalized text within seconds of the lead coming in. An AI agent then runs the back and forth with the customer and puts real-time availability in front of them from adaptive capacity. It confirms the job type and books the appointment straight onto the dispatch board tagged with a job summary. All of that done with no CSR involvement necessary. And if the homeowner doesn't respond to that text, it's going to follow up automatically on a cadence that you set. And it can even place an outbound voice call. So you set up campaigns by lead source. That way you can handle an Angie lead differently than a Google lead, for example. And there's an insights dashboard for your response rates, your conversion, and your revenue. And a human can jump in and take over any conversation at any point if it's getting too complex. Now, it is early days for this product. It's rolling out in kind of a pilot state, but the upside to this is very real. It's the difference between catching that lead that came in at 8 p.m. on a Saturday in 30 seconds versus Monday morning after they already booked with somebody else. All right, into the early access section. So everything in this section is not fully out yet, but if you want to, you can participate in the early access. We've got Affirm coming as a financing option. And Affirm specifically specializes in like smaller ticket things like under $1,000, which is the gap that Affirm can fill. So once an admin enables it, they can set up an estimate range where it shows up by default. So like from $100 to $3,000, for example. So that when the technician sends the online estimate, it shows that little blurb that says, as low as X dollars a month with Affirm. If the homeowner is interested in that, they can tap or click on the link. It pre-qualifies them right there. And then that invoice gets paid through Affirm through the customer portal. And before we wrap up, let me just hit you with a quick rapid fire round of enhancements and fixes. So under dispatch, when a technician starts a job earlier than scheduled, the appointment now jumps to the actual start time on the dispatch board right away and keeps its scheduled length. There's also a minor fix here, so auto-adjusted appointments no longer stretch past midnight into the next day. They stop at the end of their scheduled day, which they should. And on Teams management, you can now just drag and drop to reorder teams and technicians and move technicians between teams. Whereas previously you had to click those little move up and move down arrow buttons. Under global search, you can now search for installed equipment by its asset number. For service agreements, you can now change the business unit on an active agreement. You can do that either one at a time or in bulk, so after a reorg, you can reattribute it correctly. Future jobs and billing will follow the new business unit while the past stuff stays where it was. There's also a service agreement document editor. So office staff with the correct permissions can make last-minute edits to the agreement document in the preview and send step before it goes out for signature. That is off by default, so talk to your CSM if you want that turned on. And in early access, you can now send and receive messages right from inside a service agreement. So contract admins can talk to customers and teammates in context without leaving the agreement. And one on Dispatch Pro, there's a new optional toggle to keep Dispatch Pro on when reassigned. That's in your locking jobs settings. So you can manually reassign a Dispatch Pro job without yanking it out of the optimization pool. Dispatch Pro can keep considering it on future runs. Anyways, that's all I got for today. Be sure to hit like if you like these videos and find them valuable. Be sure to subscribe to ServiceTitan's YouTube channel if you haven't done that already. Hit that bell icon so that YouTube notifies you anytime we upload a new video. And leave me a comment down below. Let me know what you think about the new release, what you're still hoping to see, or what your favorite summer barbecue food is. I'm a salted watermelon boy myself. Appreciate it. Peace.